And welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Very shortly, we're going to bring you a news alert. We're watching some 3 constituencies that are returning those 34B forms. Results coming in from Kisumu West, TRT and Busia. But for Kisumu West, we can report to you that the total was exactly 0. All right, so let's give you more information now. Masharia, we were talking about what could have led to this sort of vote turnout. The 48% that all on the panel have said they believe is curious. So there was a boycott call, and one would expect that that would work for, NASA strongholds. Then there was the threat of intimidation as well. We saw some governors, threatening action if people went to the polls. Again, one would equate that largely with what would happen in swing areas or in areas that are largely NASA. But what else do you think could have influenced this sort of low turnout that we see?
One obviously is voter apathy. And people are tired, I think, of politics and of elections. The other is that there is no urgency to vote. Uhuru supporters have nothing to vote against. Uhuru supporters come out to vote against Raila, not necessarily to vote for Uhuru. If Raila is not in the field, they stay home. Uhuru is already winning, so why bother waking up early to go and vote? Because they know he's assured of a win.
Right.
And I think that would affect voter turnout in Jubilee strongholds and probably also in other parts of the country.
Prof, politically, what does that signal then for Jubilee in terms of their mobilization? I mean, they had the whole Mbele Kosawa, campaign, Kumira, which was the rallying call, if you like, in their strongholds, that there just has to be this sort of massive turnout. Did that not work?
I think it's probably worked. In my opinion, it has worked, because I think the only thing that that happened is that because a major contender like Raila Odinga was not on the ballot, then there was some lethargy in the way they voted. So they probably felt that even if we are persuaded, if there's a problem, if there is a threat to Uhuru, summon us, we shall come, even at 4 p.m. But because they didn't see it, it worked, because they didn't have to prove anything. They are already sure that their candidate is winning the election. But probably around midday today, if it was announced that actually Raila Odinga is still on ballot, and so if you don't watch out, Uhuru will lose the election, probably they would have turned up by 2, and you would know that it worked. So really, you cannot question the strategy of Jubilee. It worked, but only that there was no threat to their candidate. And the initial results you are seeing on the screen demonstrate that. So you don't need to read too much about that, because you cannot use the low voter turnout in the Jubilee zones to argue that probably Jubilee is not popular there. That will be unscientific. The political behavior that we have is that there was no threat. But when it comes to non-Jubilee areas, there are places where there was a heavy campaign by Jubilee. I can quote places like Bungoma, and there's a lot of water turnout. There are 2 explanations to that. The first one is that probably people felt intimidated, that if they voted, so-and-so would be watching them and probably could threaten them. That is one possibility. So again, it doesn't give the correct picture of what would have been the case if we had a perfect situation. The other bit could be that there are people who just refused to vote because they don't like Jubilee in those areas. And so the most difficult thing is how to ascertain what caused them not to vote. We shall after this election, and I think we shall end up with a scientific pollster, where we need to ask questions, specific questions, to determine what made people in such Jubilee strongholds not to vote, and even in non-Jubilee areas, what caused them not to vote. You might come out with very interesting figures. So it is not right to just use this forum to conclude that because people didn't turn up this way, then it is probably because they don't like so-and-so. We need a scientific study to reach that.
One thing to bear in mind is that there was an urgency to the Jubilee campaign. This Kumira business is supposed to show, it's supposed to ratify the vote that he claims he got in the first election, the one which was annulled by the Supreme Court. So for them getting 8 million plus was the target. Then they can stand up and say, you see, despite the Supreme Court, we still got our vote.
Right.
Now, if they end up with substantially less than that, they have a problem.
What kind of problem?
Legitimacy again.
Right.
It will show that the Supreme Court was right.
Yes, but when it shows that the Supreme Court was right, that will be at the point of perception, but it won't be scientific.
No, it's not scientific.
Yes.
We're talking about your perception.
Yes, the perception will be that you couldn't raise 8.2%, so you are not as popular as you put it. But when probably you subject the same scenario to a scientific study, you might find that people didn't turn up for various reasons.
Right.
Well, I guess what Macharia is saying is they need to exceed what they got in the August 8th election. But again, we have to take into account voter apathy, an issue that's come around after all this. We also have to take into account what he said earlier, that if there's no contested, if Raila is not on the ballot, who are we competing against?
Right.
If they're not come out to vote. So even less than the 8 million can come out and vote. So the numbers, the statistics need a lot of deeper research than just thinking about what the numbers will
And
reflect.
what was that? Was that then, Prof, the real strategy? Was there an underestimation of what it would mean not to have Raila Odinga, who has traditionally been the candidate, you know, to beat actually, you know, in elections?
I think I don't know, from the point of view of Jubilee, I think what matters in their corner is to win the election. So this election spares them the headache of having to fight Raila Odinga, so they are probably comfortable with that situation. But even as they are comfortable with that situation, on the other hand, Raila Odinga can still, through perception, argue that I'm that popular. Because it's, again, it may not be that scientific, but because if, for example, you get, let's say if Uhuru Kenyatta gets below 8 million and gets probably 5 million, the easiest way to do it is somebody will subtract 5 from 19 and say 14 million belong to Raila Odinga. So in terms of perception to the people, mamambogas on the streets, they will argue this is actually the point. Raila's votes were 14 million, and therefore he's the one who should be the president. But probably if you subject that to any scientific study, it doesn't make sense.
You may be wrong, right.
So in terms of calculation, I think on the part, both sides have certain problems. For Jubilee, rejoicing in this figure is enough because it gives them the win.
Yeah.
But in the long run, the perception that Raila is going to build on is a big disadvantage to Jubilee.
Right.
So really, we have to be very careful.
And politics
for Jubilee, it was
perception.
important to win.
Yes.
And it was important that
To win with a huge margin.
Leave alone that
Not
to
just
win,
to win.
to have an
Just
election
to win.
and to win.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is why, first of all, they had to make sure that there is an election.
Yes.
First.
And I think
That's the first way.
That was the first thing.
Okay, right.
And that maybe explains
Right.
why some Supreme Court judges suddenly disappeared.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. But I hear you all, the perception issue, and of course, for Jubilee, the first port of winning was to have an election and then win that election.
Then if there's anything to
and
negotiate,
then everything else,
you negotiate when he's sitting
once
on
you
the chair.
have won. We hear you.
They
All
don't
right.
even want to negotiate.
Let's cross over to Nakuru quickly and catch up with our Wilkis Sanyaba, who's been, of course, on the ground for us. Wilkis, of course, polls have